Well, hello, this is Ed Mills with Colorado Broadband Office. Before we get started, we're still hearing some ambient noise in the background. It sounds like rustling of papers. So while the presentation is going, if we could get everyone to just keep it on mute, there will be a time when we will have question and answer, and then you can unmute your phone at that time. We appreciate it. My name is Ed Mills. I'm with the Colorado Broadband Office here in the Office of Information Technology. And we're excited today on February 25th at noon to present to you a Lunch and Learn webinar featuring the Broadband Fund. And Brian Martin today is going to be talking with us. He's the Acting Broadband Fund and Deployment Director. He's going to be talking about the grant cycle, program goals, and discuss the ways interested parties can apply for funding. The Broadband Fund in the Executive Director's Office of the Department of Regulatory Agencies, also known as DORA, exists to connect communities and fuel economic growth in unserved areas across Colorado. The Broadband Deployment Board, authorized under revised statute 40.15.509.5, runs competitive grant cycles overseen by the Broadband Fund to award funds to projects designed to deploy broadband service in all the unserved areas of the state. With a portfolio of 31 projects utilizing over $24 million in funding, the Broadband Deployment Board offers awards to projects based on multiple factors, including community involvement, geographic need, sustainability, cost effectiveness, and community impact. Broadband Deployment Board supervised the first grant cycle in 2016 and now manages 2 separate grant cycles per year with an average of 20 applications per cycle. Broadband Deployment Board awards funding to projects aiming to provide more households with access to cost-effective and worthy broadband plans from local providers and electrical cooperatives. So without further ado, I know you didn't hear to come and hear me talk. We're going to turn it over to Brian. We just want to remind you that today's presentation, as well as all of our Lunch and Learn series, can be found on the Colorado broadband.co.gov site. Here is a listing of where those live, and we ask you to come in frequently and take a look at those. But right now, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ed. I appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. Oops. Okay. Can you see that? Can everybody see what I have on the screen right now?
Yes, Brian, we can see it.
Got the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies Broadband Fund. Great. And just wanted to confirm everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Okay. Great. So super. Thank you very much, everyone. And Ed, thanks for the introduction. I really appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about the program that I oversee and answer any questions that will come up. I'll try to make this as quick and as efficient as possible, so that if you do have additional questions, feel free to fire them off towards the end. Otherwise, you are all welcome to send me an email or give me a call. My contact info will be listed at the end of this webinar. So let's get started. Okay, so as mentioned, my name is Brian Martin. I'm the Acting Broadband Fund and Deployment Director. There is generally another position associated here called a grant specialist. We are currently in the hiring process, which I'm sure you all know can be interesting at times. So that's a TBD, right? But soon we'll have somebody in place. So considering the portfolio of grants that we have, this will be a very welcome addition for me. Currently, it's the one-man show. So, as I mentioned, or as Ed has mentioned, the Broadband Fund exists to connect communities and fuel economic growth into unserved areas. Specifically, we're looking to fund projects that will provide the 25 up, 3 down threshold that's established by both the FCC and this program. Our idea is to ensure that all of Colorado has access to broadband level services. Currently, I'm sure you're aware, there's lots of hard to reach areas across Colorado and certainly across a lot of the country where folks aren't able to gain access to a comparable broadband level service. So This program, which came up, which is revised under revised statute 4015-509.5, establishes something called the Colorado Broadband Deployment Board. And that is a 16-member board that reviews applications that are submitted currently under 2 grant cycles. And then my program, the Broadband Fund, is tasked with supporting the efforts of that broadband board and conducting monitoring and oversight activities to ensure that each project and grant is continuing its work under full compliance. As Ed mentioned, currently we have a portfolio of 31 different projects across the state, utilizing $24 million in funding. We just finished a previous grant cycle referred to as the Summer 19, and then currently the board is preparing for the review in March of the Winter 2020 cycle. So just a quick thing, initially we were running 2 grant cycles, but felt like it was more prudent and productive to have 2. So that's where we are at this point. As you mentioned, the broadband board oversaw the first cycle in 2016, and now we have 2. And there's been a lot of popularity. One of the things that I'm working on is developing some sort of awareness campaign to ensure folks are aware. Here's a program. There is funding available, so work with your communities or work with your providers to submit an application. So we are averaging around 20 applications per cycle, and all various parts of the state. And I have a little map a little bit later on, which you'll be able to see where the currently funded projects are operating. But we do get them from all across.
So I sensed your frustration on the POE. Still
Okay, I'll just move on to the next slide. So I think I mentioned that established under HB 141328, that was the initial legislation which launched this bill, and then a previous update happened in 2018 under Senate Bill 18002. There are plans potentially, I believe, to enact some more revisions to the program, but that's currently, we don't have a date or anything, but we're certainly working with different offices and with the broadband board to ensure that our process is constantly in a state of revision and being as effective and as efficient as possible. Just very quickly, those funds get allocated through something called the High Cost Support Mechanism, which is the quarterly charge to telecommunication organizations across the state. Those are submitted to the Public Utilities Commission on a quarterly basis and then set into something called the broadband account. We're always striving to ensure that there's available funds for as many projects as possible. And that funding is allocated to, the board allocates a certain amount of that funding each cycle, and full-time staff in the Broadband Fund are tasked with overseeing, preparing those awards for the board to review, and then supporting the board in their efforts to monitor and oversee those projects to ensure that they are completed. So again, how it works, this is a reimbursement-based grant process. So when grants are made, contracts are signed, and the project begins, on a quarterly basis, each of these projects will submit a reimbursement report per quarterly cycle. This will detail the project activities in addition to the funding and demonstrate progress being made. Grantees will always submit invoices to demonstrate funding has been utilized in a way that's compliant with the program. And then we at the Broadband Fund will review and approve or have follow-up questions and then submit requests for reimbursement to each of these projects as we complete the reviews. All grants are for last mile infrastructure deployment only. Nothing regarding ongoing operations is allowed. And of course, our focus has always been on unserved areas. So that's 10-1 and under, or not even 10-1, and I think in some cases you'll find. As I mentioned, Broadband Deployment Board are the folks who make all of the decisions. We'll dive a little bit into them in the next slide. But there's a very big focus on the speed being provided and the ability for each project to meet the minimum requirements of our program. So we awarded grant agreements in 16, 17, 18, and then since the introduction of 2 cycles, then we had 2 cycles that ran in 2019, referred to as the winter and summer cycles. We have generally about $4 or $5 million per cycle available. It is our, focus is always on ensuring that there's enough funding, but I can give a very quick example. There's about $24 million in funding that has been requested in the winter 2020 cycle, and we've allocated about 7. So that is, that's a problem and something we're looking at figuring out how to rectify. But yeah, there's always as much money as we can provide to be available, but there's never enough to cover every project. As I mentioned, there's a 16-member board, which includes people from the industry, state and local government, civilians from unserved areas, and sort of county commissioners, things like that. So we have a depth of experience on this board, and it's really a great opportunity. If you do have the ability to listen in to some of the discussions, I would wholeheartely recommend it. I mean, we do have some really strong experts in the broadband telecommunications industry in Colorado, and just the ability to learn from them on a regular basis has been really beneficial for me. But I think any folks who are interested in learning more about how board decisions are made, chiming into one of the board meetings will certainly help. And we do have a board meeting at the end of March, which will be the initial conduction of reviewing those applications. So I recommend you chime in and listen in to see what they're talking about. So as I mentioned, that awards are made through a competitive application review. We'll dive a little bit into that in a sec. But since 2016, the initial grant cycle, the board has awarded $26,870,516 to 38 projects. So pretty proud of the accomplishments of the board there. So I wanted to just give you an idea of who some of the awarded grants were, starting by 2016 and coming up to our last cycle. Lots of big names and lots of great projects going on. This is a look at the funding that was awarded. Most of our grants will, when they're submitted, will have a request for funding and then have to match the funding requirement by at least 25% of the total project cost. So that does not include, this is the numbers that you're seeing on the screen are just the amounts that they have requested. But eligible applicants, and I'll dive into this in a little bit, do need to submit at least a 25% match to the project. Here's a map that I mentioned a little bit earlier. These numbers, the number of dots here, the Wi-Fi dots you're seeing may not correspond to the amount of projects because some of the different projects we have different sites. So when you look at the Wi-Fi symbols under Durango and Pagosa Springs, there's multiple ones, but there's 3 different sites for 1 different project. But this just gives you an idea of the general layout of how many projects we have being funded, and then location-wise where they're based. And again, if you have any questions, if you want to just jot them down right now, I'll definitely open it up at the end. So very quickly on that application process. So we have 2 cycles. There's 2 deadlines, January 15th and July 15th every year. Potential applicants, folks who are interested in applying, will submit those applications by that deadline. And then there's a 60-day comment period, which, so for this cycle will end, I believe, March 17th is the final day, or 16th. And those applications are open for public comment. So interested stakeholders, entities, anyone who feels the need to do so will provide a comment and submit either letters to support, comments, criticisms, whatever. So that 60-day period. Then the board will open up a public board meeting for discussion regarding those applications. And there's a process generally where they'll review each application and prior to this board meeting taking place. They'll discuss whether each application meets minimum requirements. Once they've established which applicants have met the minimum requirements, they'll move into discussing the award criteria, which again, we'll get into in a sec, but this is all part of the board deliberations process. And then finally, the board makes a decision. There is something called an appeals process time period. So if folks who have applied or are unhappy or happy with the board decisions, they have a certain amount of time to submit an appeal or something called a right of first refusal. So after that process goes through, and if there's an appeal process, there are board meetings that have a focus exclusively on the appeals process. Once everything is all said and done, grants are awarded. So, as I mentioned, there's some of the minimum requirements that projects to do apply have to meet. One of them is provide 25/3 service to an unserved rural area. It must be a new project. That money is not available for anything other than infrastructure deployment. There is a 25% minimum match. Eligible applicants are for-profit local providers or rural electric cooperatives. There must be the project must demonstrate there's no issues with overbuilding. So you'll not be able to build on. I'm sorry. You'll not be able to utilize your project in an area that has received federal funding in the last 24 months. And then the board assesses whether or not each project meets the reliability standards of the industry and can fully demonstrate there's a business plan, a 5-year plan for service, that their project can get completed within 2 years and is cost effective. So there's sort of a very quick summary of the minimum requirements that have to be met. And if folks are interested, the application is available on our website. Feel free to take a look at that. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Then after the minimum requirements have been determined, the board also looks at a variety of selection criteria demonstrating its project's impact on economic health, development, education, public safety. Is there distribution to unserved areas? What are the network redundancy and diversity sections? Is it cost effective? So the board does ensure that there's a cost per household versus cost for total grant. So most of our applications will, in their application, they'll submit, okay, so we are aiming to provide broadband level service, 25/3, 100, 100, 1 gig up, 1 gig down service to, I'm throwing numbers out here. So up to 238 homes, which include 14 businesses in rural, Moffat County. So the project, the onus is generally on the applicant to demonstrate that it's able to meet all of the minimum requirements and the award selection criteria that you see on this slide. Do they have a record of operation that's sustainable? Are they able to run the business effectively? Have there been any problems regarding their service and demonstrating their reliability within previous areas that they've operated in? So just to quickly summarize, there's a lot of things that the board requires applicants to submit, and it's always going to be on the onus of the applicant to demonstrate that it meets all of the requirements and the award criteria set by the board. And if you wanted to take a look at other applications, I've got a link at the end of this webinar which can take you to all of the applications that have been submitted for review since, I believe it's since 2017. I haven't set everything up yet, but that will give you an opportunity just to see what folks have been submitting. So very quickly, some of the responsibilities once you become a grantee: demonstrating your project success and maintaining your financial accountability. That comes through the reimbursement reports and through the check-ins that we'll do. And every project gets monitored over a 1 or 2 day site visit. So somebody from Broadband Fund will pop in and sit down with each applicant and talk through the progress of the project, take a look at the sites that are being serviced, and do their best to meet with everybody who's been involved. As I mentioned, grantees do need to report on their project plan, the objectives, all expenditures, and progress being made throughout the course of the project. Very big focus on accuracy of data. I think that's a big one for us. Previously, the Broadband Fund hasn't perfected the art of recognizing and utilizing data in the most important positive way we can, and that's something we're definitely aiming to do more of. So having very clear data is always going to be a big part of this project. You have to meet the reporting requirements and work very closely with Broadband Fund staff to discuss changes. Just very quickly here at Broadband Fund, we understand sometimes things change, and that's part of the process. It's not a problem. The important thing is to work with your Broadband Fund staff to ensure those changes are, allowable and with a high degree that focus on the overall success of the project itself. Just very quickly, these are some of the dates, if you're interested, that we focus on. So 4 times a year, quarterly performance reports, their reimbursement requests get submitted on these particular dates. There is in addition to the monitoring and checklist and visit, there is a final performance report that's due 45 days after the end of the project. And that date is always going to be set within the grant agreement. And then, as I mentioned, these 2 new grant application cycles per year, January 15th and July 15th. So here are a couple links that can give you an opportunity to review a little more information. So our website is colorado.gov/DORA. If you wanted to look at previously submitted applications, and there's a list of applications that were funded on a different part of the website, but you should be able to find it through there. That's the application submitted for review. Then additionally, we have our Broadband Fund board policies, which is so the board does have some requirements through statute that it needs to follow, but in the initial days of 2014, 15, 16, it had to set a wide variety of policies regarding the conduct of its operations and how it reviewed applications. So that is something that is constantly being reviewed on an annual basis, but you can give you an idea of what the current Broadband Fund board policies are at this link that I've provided. There is and folks will definitely obviously recognize the broadband office's number, but our website, this is the OIT map, which helps both the board and folks who are interested in applying to determine if the area they're looking to work in is unserved and who is currently working in those areas. And finally, the application for funding here is listed on our website. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about it to download that and take a look and just get a feel for what the board expects applications to cover. Finally, here is my contact information, Brian Martin at state.co.us. That's my office number. And then we did set up a broadband-focused email, which I do check as well and gets forwarded to my email. So if you have questions, concerns, or just want to pass the time and talk about what's going on in broadband, I'm always here to be available. So feel free to reach out. That is the end, I believe. Yeah. So Ed, I can open this up for questions right now. And
yeah, we've got a question coming in right now, and it says,
okay.
Please discuss the 10.1 requirement a little more. We live in an area where internet speed is all over the place. Some have less than 10.1, but many have something in between 10.1 and 25.3. Some folks with line of sight to tower have 25.3. Does everyone included in the grant need to be 10.1 or below?
No, and I really appreciate you coming up with that question. That's a really good question to look into. So our requirements for applications are that you must provide at least 25.3. And we always look, or I should say the board always looks to fund areas that don't even meet the 10.1 threshold. So if you have an area which, the area where you're living in and you're not able to reach those speeds, you're not able to reach 25.3, then if there are local providers you could work with, then you could certainly potentially be considered eligible for funding. The board's onus is always to get to areas where there's very, very poor service. And I'm sure some folks may or may not be aware, but the drive has always been for 100% access by summer 2020, and we're doing our best to ensure that we can contribute to that. So if you're not receiving services of 25.3 or up, you definitely could be considered eligible.
Excellent. Hey, Brian, could you put up that last slide where it says questions so people can get your contact information? And I think we have another question coming in on chat. Anybody can speak up at any point, but let me see if I can figure this out one. This is from Gordon. In our mountain area, we get much lower than 10.1, depending on how far from the DSLAM we are, even though CenturyLink's map shows that we do.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a reoccurring issue, you know, in the applications that we've seen. There's a lot of frustration with CenturyLink. You know, they do a good job around Colorado, but there are times where applications have been submitted which say that CenturyLink says one thing, but their website says another. So depending on your direction from the DSLAM, it's always good to take a look at the OIT map and see what's happening in your area, and then you know, submitting questions or comments regarding applications that are potentially being in your area. And I would encourage folks who currently are not receiving broadband level service to find out who is serving in your area, whether it's you know, a local provider or someone who's been more established for a longer period, like CenturyLink or you know, Brainstorm VR Wireless. So reaching out to those folks and gathering support from your community, I think that's a big one to consider. In the past cycle, we have had several applications from local providers, because that's who's eligible, who have been working very closely with homeowners associations who are desperate to bring, you know, high quality broadband level speeds to their neighborhoods. I think that's been an ongoing issue where neighborhoods are being built or neighborhoods have been forgotten. So we would encourage you to work with your community or with your neighbors to, you know, come together to figure out what are your most immediate needs and interests, and then start contacting local providers to see if they can support you in that. And again, if I'm not able to answer your question fully, then please feel free to reach out to me afterwards. I'll do my best. So.
Yeah, excellent. So Brian, here again is a question on chat. And again, I just want to remind anyone that you can speak up at any point and ask your questions directly to Brian. You don't have to do it through chat. But this question is from Bev at Elk Falls Ranch. And it says, our neighborhood is not close to an entity that will enhance economic development, education, public health, or safety, etc. However, there are many residents that want to be able to work from home. Does that count?
Absolutely, great question, Beth. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think the state of Colorado is always driving to support folks who are able to work from home if, you know, if the commute is too much, or if there's opportunities for working from home for, you know, your own businesses, those kind of things. That's certainly something that the board looks at. The key is always going to be able to have applications demonstrate the community impact is significant. So, you know, having just children being able to access quality resources for their homework is a big one. You know, running your business from home is absolutely key as well. You know, you're not always going to be in areas where there's a lot of great depth of economic development, and that's not the focus. The focus is just ensuring that 100% of Colorado is able to access broadband level speeds. So there's a variety of factors that the board takes into consideration when it reviews these applications, but, you know, you wouldn't be discounted from that. And I think the board is always excited to help support rural neighborhoods, you know, getting into it and gaining access. You know, I think we can all very safely argue that having access to sustainable, quality internet enhances everybody's lives. So.
We have another question. This is from Kyle, and it says, are residential addresses the only addresses considered in the application?
No, the board also looks at community anchor institutions like fire departments or hospitals, in addition to business addresses. Generally, you know, the focus is going to be on how many households is a project able to serve, but if there's an opportunity to provide service to schools, hospitals, small businesses around in the proposed project area, then that's absolutely a positive thing.
Excellent. Next question is from Curtis. And he says, as a service provider, what are the best forums to engage with local, county governments to discuss the needs of their communities and the potential broadband development projects?
Great. No, that's a great question. Really great. So if I were a local provider, what would I want to do? I'd certainly want to reach out to the district or the county and find out what they're doing. So here's something to consider. The Department of Local Affairs, DOLA, has a middle mile infrastructure funding program as well. So they work fairly exclusively with counties and districts around the state to help develop their regional broadband plans and provide some funding in order to support that middle mile. So in case folks aren't aware, middle mile is essentially from provider to area of impact, not to the premises or not to the home, but it's sort of the next steps being taken before it goes to users. So reaching out to your local state, or sorry, not state, your local governments to determine what they feel their needs are would certainly be helpful. If there are ways that you could determine that certain neighborhoods don't have access, perhaps some advertising in those areas wouldn't hurt you either. Again, I'm not sure, I'm not in that position, but if I were a provider, I'd want to start with the county and the districts and local governments and see if they know of areas that need service, and then moving out from there.
And to Brian mentioning DOLA, we will be having a follow-up conversation. We'll have a lunch and learn a little further down the road with DOLA. And so please look for that through our newsletter, and you can also check on our website. Are there any other questions? Anybody that is online? And here we have another one on chat. This is from Gordon.
Okay.
And the DOLA application process include results from the speed test hosted by the Colorado Broadband Office. I don't know. Can you answer that?
That is a great question. I do not know. I would assume so. But, the OIT's broadband map really tries to encompass as much information that's publicly available. And I do want to stress one thing here. This OIT broadband map in the link that I showed you previously, if I can get to it, that is all user submitted information. So OIT requests submissions twice a year to update all their records. So this particular broadband map that you're looking at is all based on what folks are submitting. To the best of our knowledge, it is as accurate as we can figure out. So hopefully, yes, I would assume DOLA has that information available. But I would take a look at that, start there with your own address, start there with a well-known address, just to get a feel for how that map works, and then, expand on that. And if you have questions, folks in my office, folks over in DOLA, and folks in OIT can certainly help.
Excellent. Other questions? Oh, actually, we got another question that's popped in. Nobody wants to talk today. That's all right. We'll talk.
That's okay.
This is Sean says, you mentioned the funding wouldn't be available in communities that are already being served by a service provider. Would funding be available if the current SP isn't providing 25/3?
Yes. In a nutshell, yes. Again, the application is going to have to very clearly demonstrate that through a variety of resources, and folks can use essentially anything they can think of. And, the board looks at as much information as it can to determine whether an area is unserved. And sometimes there are certain communities where parts of it are able to receive high service through line of sight, and then other parts of that neighborhood may have some coverage with debris or trees, and they're not able to receive that service. And that's understandable. And of course, I'm sure it's very frustrating, but the thing is going to be each application needs to demonstrate through whatever resources are available that they are not, the current provider in that area is not meeting their needs of 25/3. And applications, and I would again encourage folks to look at previous applications, but they'll use a variety of resources such as the OIT broadband map, the FCC page, which, again, is not, it's sort of a little more something called census block, so it's not as detailed as we'd like, but it is a resource to consider. Some of the applicants have used speed tests. They've literally knocked on folks' doors and asked, how's your service? Can you demonstrate it for me? They've also, applications has gone to local providers' websites, punched in addresses where they're hoping to serve, and finding out if that particular provider is able to give them the service they're looking for. So I would, again, encourage you to use a variety of resources to demonstrate the area you're in is unserved. And yes, we do have applications from neighborhoods where some folks are not interested in it or are already receiving service, but those addresses would be removed from the application if they're already receiving that service. So the focus would be on providing service to those areas that do not meet are not able to receive 25.3 service. Sorry if that was long-winded. Hopefully I answered.
Yep, that was good. Thank you.
So Brian, this is Teresa Ferguson.
Hello, Teresa.
Hi. Thanks so much for joining us today and providing all this information. I was just looking through the Universal Service Administrative Company. They're the administrator for the FCC for the CAF funding, the Connect America Fund that you were speaking about. I just know really interesting location on that map that gives you local data. It actually.
Oh wow! Really?
Yeah, I know, right? These things just show up. But if any of the folks on the call would be interested, if you go to data.usac.org/public reports /CAF-map/ and I can copy that and put it into the chat, actually get a list of the addresses where CAF2 funding has been deployed and the download speed. Giving it, for many of these, they were 10.1. And I guess my question is, could communities or providers reference this data and have at least a place to start to identify where areas would be eligible for our program, broadband, the Broadband Fund, if they were receiving under 25.3 in those areas? Could this be a source to use?
Absolutely. First off, thank you, Teresa, for adding to that. I really appreciate it. That is an excellent resource. I would absolutely say yes. Again, as we mentioned, the board is very much focused on ensuring that applications take their initiative to demonstrate that an area is unserved, and that sounds like a great resource. So I would, if you could put that into the chat for everybody, I think that's something everyone who's interested in applying should take a look at and see
It looks like
what
there's
service is
about,
being provided.
I'm sorry, Brian. I did put it in the
No,
chat.
go ahead.
And in there, it looks like there's about 250,000
Wow.
included there. So, and I think you can sort it by company name, and yeah, looks like it's a pretty agile tool. I'm sure our teams, and mapping know about this, Brian, but I just saw it like a day or two ago, so I wanted to share it with you.
That's a great one. Thank you, Teresa.
Excellent information. So we had another question come in. Brian, we're going to give you just a break for a second, because I think someone from our team can maybe handle this. So the question is—
So I stop?
No, you're fine. Stay just where you're at, because I'm sure everybody has other questions for you. But when will OIT's broadband maps include a more granular level of broadband capability by technology? So the board can see the underserved areas versus today, where the maps are less than accurate. For example, speeds of DSL as a function of distance from the DSLAM to a given home address. And Megan from our team is probably the best one to answer this question. Megan, can you answer that for us?
Yes, I can partially answer that. So we do have the capability to filter by technology type, but we don't get the detailed information from the providers about locations of DSLAMs and their exact routing. So we don't have the capability to determine or map the speed as it relates to distance from the DSLAM in DSL service, for example. So without getting better data from the providers, that can be a little bit tough. Let me just review the question again to see what else I need to answer. Let's see. Yeah, and the data in the OIT map comes directly from providers. So it is the onus of the applicant to prove that the areas that they are applying for is unserved. If our data does not support that, you are welcome to contact us and find out more about the data. We can kind of help talk you through the details of the data and figure out if there's any room for error in what you're looking at, because in some cases we get good data, in some cases it's a little less accurate. So we don't want to say that's the definitive source. There can be other evidence introduced, and we can help you look into that.
And while Megan was speaking, we had another question that comes in. If either of you can address this, it says, what about other technologies like wireless coverage?
What was the question? Sorry.
It just says, what about other technologies like wireless coverage? Can we get information on that, or is it just fixed?
Oh, like mobile wireless?
Yes.
We do not have data from a lot of the major mobile wireless companies. So it makes it tough to map out a whole picture of what wireless looks like in Colorado. However, I don't think that mobile service counts against the eligibility requirements in the Broadband Fund. I think
That's correct.
It has to be a fixed residential service, or a fixed residential service. So that would be anything wired or a fixed wireless service. Excellent.
We're very fortunate to have several members of our team on with Brian, and thank you for that. And I'm sorry that clarification came in, said to follow up to that question, I meant fixed wireless is the comment. So the what about other technologies like wireless coverage? I meant fixed wireless was the question.
Okay. Yeah, so we do, fixed wireless is included in our maps. So most of that is determined by, or most of it is mapped out based on propagation models. With the limitations of propagation models can make some of the mapping difficult. So a lot of times, even if a location is within the area you think that tower can reach, it might not get service because of vegetation or terrain or those kinds of things. So we do the best we can in mapping those, but it's always good to get an on-the-ground speed test or other evidence of service available.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Megan, for helping us with that. And as we start to come to the close, I wanted to see if we had any other questions for Brian while we have him on the line. This has been great information. But does anyone else have a question for Brian and the Broadband Fund? Brian, I think you answered all their questions.
Great. Hey, I consider that a success.
Well, we thank you, Brian, for your time. This has been extremely informative, and just wanted to let you know that this will be up on our website at Colorado Broadband website. We have an entire series of lunch and learns that it's video on demand, and we ask you to go in there frequently and often and send links to your friends. There's a lot of topics that people will be interested in, and we're fortunate that we can give you back some time in your day. And of course, please join us next month, usually toward the end of the month on Tuesday at noon for lunch and learn. And so, Brian, once again, thank you. Appreciate your time. It was a great information, and we will put a PDF copy of Brian's presentation up on the internet as well as this recording. And we hope you all have a very nice day.
Thanks so much.
Take care.